Hello everyone, I've teamed up with the Amino app for this video. If you don't already know who Amino is an exciting global app that brings people together from all over the world with similar interests in one place. Whatever you're interested in, Amino have you covered with global communities from Rick and Morty all the way to urban legends. I personally really like the horror and Rick and Morty Aminos, but especially the paranormal one. The Paranormal Amino features a real-time feed where you can interact with other users, take part in polls, and join group discussions. This means that there's always something going on and people to talk to. I like the featured page where I found some very interesting stories like the Alaskan Urban Legends blog. So I definitely recommend downloading it. There's links in the description to the app. Covering me today while I'm unwell is my good friend Mortis Media. I want to say a massive thank you to him. Make sure you go check out his channel after the video.
I was running on the trails at the Nathan Hale homestead, an 18th century farmhouse and property of a Revolutionary War hero. This was in Connecticut, which is only about a 10-minute drive away from my grandmother's lake house. I could not find a map of the trails anywhere online, and there didn't seem to be any signage at this place, just a bunch of random mountain bike trails in the woods. I was only going to run 4 miles, so I estimated that I would run for about 30 minutes, using my watch to keep myself on track. So I ran around the trails for a while, and nothing seemed too out of the ordinary. It was around 9 on a Monday morning, and the only sounds were the distant hums of Route 31, birds chirping, and the occasional squirrel or deer that scampered off whenever I came near. The trail seemed to wind around a lot. If not for my better than average directional skills, I could have easily gotten lost. About 20 minutes in, I saw something strange about 50 meters off. A finely polished and light-colored wooden coffin. I was a little weirded out to say the least, and waited until I got closer for a better look. I rounded a corner where several old tree stumps blocked my view, only to find that the coffin had disappeared. Where it should have been, there was just a clump of ferns. Odd. I turned around shortly thereafter and made my way back to my car. I was maybe half a mile out when I heard a very distinctive knocking on a nearby tree. I was a little spooked, but chalked it up to be a woodpecker or something. However, not 30 seconds later, there it was, on a completely different tree ahead of me. Exactly the same rhythm. Tock, tock, to tock, tock. I picked up the pace. The trail widened a little, and I could see way ahead to the entrance to the parking lot where my car was. There it was again, on a tree seemingly right next to me. I truly started freaking out, and started to book it back to the lot. I was nearing the opening, when time seemed to slow down. All of a sudden, it felt like the temperature dropped about 20 degrees. The birds stopped singing, and my simple Timex watch started to malfunction, making all sorts of beeping noises, and the numbers glitching on the screen. The beat sounded impossibly loud this time, like it were hacked into every surrounding tree with an axe. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over me, as I anticipated hearing the rhythm again. I burst into the parking lot, and everything went back to normal. The temperature was back in the mid-70s, and birds were chirping away. I looked at my watch, only to discover that it had gone completely blank. I stood there and stared at it until it flashed 12 o'clock, Monday, 1:01, January 1st. My watch had completely reset itself. It had never done this before. I got into the car and started the engine. The clock on the radio read 12. That couldn't be right. It should have been around 9:30 or 9:45 at the latest. So I threw her in reverse and backed up to where I could clearly make out was the main road. However, as I was about to throw the car into drive as it sat there, I heard a sharp, rapping sound on the back window, like someone hitting it with their knuckles. It was the same beat. There was no one else in the parking lot when I finished my run. No cars, nothing. I didn't dare look back and hightailed it back to my grandmother's house. I have no idea what could have caused this series of events, and I still could not explain it to this day. When I was 13, I experienced the ghost of my grandmother. She died in her sleep whilst taking a nap on the living room couch. Afterwards, according to my father and grandfather, every now and again, they could hear her make the trip from the bedroom to the kitchen and open the refrigerator door. A trip she made many times when she was alive. At first, I thought my father and grandfather were making this up, having fun at my expense. A couple years after she passed away, my father and I went to spend the weekend with my grandfather. My father and I slept on the living room couch, as it opened into a double bed. The same couch my grandmother died on. My grandfather left the house to go to a next-door neighbor's house to play poker. My father and I went to bed in the living room, and my father went right to sleep. I, however, laid awake, reading a magazine. After a while, I heard the noise of the back bedroom door being pulled open. I heard the sound of shuffling feet, and I heard the creak in the floor directly in front of the bathroom doorway. I hear more shuffling feet. Then I hear the fridge door being pulled open, and I hear the sounds of glass bottles in the fridge door clinking against each other. Feeling thirsty, I decide to get out of bed and join my grandfather in the kitchen for a cold drink. I go into the kitchen, only to find I'm alone, by myself. I was puzzled. I could have sworn I heard my grandfather walk from the bedroom into the kitchen and open the fridge. It was at that moment that I remembered that my grandfather wasn't home. He was over at the neighbor's house, and he hadn't come back yet. Then I remembered my grandfather and father's ghost stories, and then I got scared. I raced from the kitchen into the living room and leaped over my sleeping father into my side of the bed. Then I went to sleep. I don't know how long I slept for before I woke, but I felt a feeling of paralyzing fear in my body. I was frozen. I was lying on my right side, and it took me a while to work up the courage to turn my head to the left. My head was covered by a blanket. There was a shadow being cast onto my blanket. The shadow was the outline of a head and the shoulders of a woman with a beehive hairdo. My grandmother used to always have a beehive hairdo, even years after it went out of style, up until she died. I heard heavy breathing coming from the shadow. I had to work up the courage to move one of my hands to remove the blanket off my face, and when I did, in an instant, the paralyzing fear I felt was gone. The shadow was gone, The sounds of heavy breathing was gone. My father was still sleeping. I pulled the blanket back over my head and went back to sleep, only to wake up on my right side, and the paralyzing fear was back. I forced my head to turn. The shadow was back. The heavy breathing was back, and again I summoned up all my courage to move my hand and take my blanket off my face, only to find that there is nothing there, and the feeling is again gone. I went through this same routine the entire night. I lost count of how many times it happened, maybe a dozen, maybe more, but it happened a lot. The next morning I told my father what happened to me throughout the entire night as he slept. The sound of the bedroom door opening, the shuffling of feet, the fridge door opening, nobody in the kitchen, being awakened with paralyzing fear, the shadow, the heavy breathing, and the repeat performances throughout the night. I kind of expected him to tell me that I was just seeing and hearing things, but instead, he just smiled and exclaimed, "That was Grandma." I did floor work with my aunt and uncle in college. We were cleaning an old church, and the caretaker took us on a small tour and showed us down in the boiler room. And honestly, that shit was creepy. We walked down this old cement staircase into the basement, no handrail, and the only light this way was halogen over the boilers, so you can barely see the steps you go down. Then you realise just how huge these boilers are, easily 3 times my height, and they were built there before there was welding, so they're riveted together. I mean, if you were to take me to this room blindfolded and ask me where I was, I'd have told you the serial killer's den. Anyway, we get cleaning, and honestly it felt like any other job initially. However, after we'd been there for a couple of hours, strange noises starting being made. I thought at first it was just the building, settling as the heating system cools down for the day. But then I realised that the vents were still pumping out warm air. I then moved from the main room and started working in the hallway. I realised a lot of the bangs I had been hearing were actually coming from the kitchen. The kitchen was locked shut. Sounded like something on wheels was moving there at one point. I also heard something metallic hit the ground there. We kept working, but also kept hearing noises. The caretaker checked in on us before we went to bed around midnight, and I had to ask, "Is the place haunted?" And he casually says, "Well, people tell me the place is haunted all the time, but I don't put much stock in it. If it is haunted, when I shut my door behind me, they just let me be. I hear an occasional noise, but again, I don't put much stock in it. Just building noises most of the time, I figure." For me, that settled it. Weird noises coming from the locked kitchen, weird noises from the floor above, and with only one person in the building besides my aunt, uncle and myself. Not to mention his room was lengthwise on the other side of the church. Moreover, he was probably around 70, so you could be pretty damn sure he wasn't behind any of the noises. So we kept cleaning and hearing the weird noises. I started working upstairs to get the entryway stripped, and that was when things really started getting strange. A general room layout was, the entrance doors were on the south side of the room, and the doors to the chapel were on the left. On the north side was a really long hallway that crossed the church lengthwise, with stairs going down to the basement on the east side of the hall. And finally, on the east side of the entrance room, there were stairs going up, and doors to the bathroom. I kept hearing one of the doors to the chapel close with a light bang. Now these are heavy doors, taller and thicker than regular doors, heavy wood, and they had one of those door stoppers that slows down and prevents them from banging. That's what made hearing those door bangs very weird. because if you simply opened the door and let it close on its own, it would almost make no audible noise. I kept hearing the noise for about 10 to 15 minutes until it finally got to me. I went to the nearest door and opened it. I poked my head in and noticed movement on the second floor. I saw smoke or mist or vapor or whatever moved almost as if it was sucked into the room by a draft. Needless to say, I was fairly creeped out by this point. Banging and noises from the locked kitchen, ghosts in the chapel, boiler rooms that feel like it's a serial killing room, old ass caretakers that would have probably turned out to be the villain in Scooby-Doo. So I went and told my aunt and uncle, who relayed their weird experience to me. Though they didn't see anything, just lots of noises, and my aunt said that she heard kids laughing at one point. My uncle was just waiting for the finish to dry downstairs, so my aunt and I went upstairs to vacuum the long hallway. And after that, we'd be done. We get the heavy ass equipment up the stairs, and my aunt and I crack some jokes about how long the hallway was, and how it was like something out of The Shining. That was when we both heard an insanely loud bang at the other end of the hallway. We just kind of stared at each other, a bit horrified, then ended up doing a very quick dry vacuum and heading back downstairs. By this point it was around 5 AM, almost 6. My aunt and I took off, and my uncle stayed until the floor finished had dried a couple of hours later. I don't really like going into churches in the first place, and now, even more so. I used to live way out in the middle of nowhere with my aunt and cousins for about 5 years. It can get pretty creepy at night. The town we were closest to only had a pre-K through, 12th grade school, post office, church, a tag agency and notary. We lived about 6 or 7 miles away, and we went to school there. Most of the homes are miles apart. We didn't even have bus stops. Each student was picked up from their house, and parents whose children rode the bus had to pay a fee for gas, because my bus rides lasted as long as 3 hours every day. That's how rural the area is, covered in woods and rivers, and there's a lot of wildlife. There had been a wildlife burning in a neighbouring county for the past couple of days, destroying acres of forest, forcing wildlife to flee. We had been extra cautious when driving, because deer were everywhere, and you couldn't drive long without seeing one. It wasn't uncommon to spot fellow motorists stranded after a deer incident. There was almost always blood-spattered trucks sitting at gas stations. My cousin and I were going home. We were using her truck to help a friend move a pool table, and we ended up staying and playing pool until a little before 4. We hadn't been drinking or anything, just hanging out, and we were driving down this old dirt road. Over the trees and in the distance, we could see smoke from the burning wildfire against the night sky. A big buck ran out in front of us, causing my cousin to hit the brakes. Then something much bigger ran out after it and grabbed the deer. It happened so fast my eyes were locked on the buck, and I didn't get a good look at whatever it was. We hit the arse end of it, and whatever it was went spinning. The truck crashed into a small ditch on the side of the road, sending dust everywhere. It wasn't serious and neither of us were hurt, but it knocked the battery cables loose. We pulled out our cell phones, but of course no signal, and we weren't surprised. Neither of us mentioned we were hit, and we got out an attempt to open the hood, but we couldn't reach the front to unlock it, because the front of the truck was wedged against dirt and sitting angled downhill. There wasn't much we could do, so we walked up the road searching for a signal and using our phones as flashlights. Then we saw the deer laying beside the road. It had been gutted. There was a huge ragged hole on its belly, and its intestines were strung out for a few feet in the directions of the woods. This was a very large deer, and we immediately decided that we weren't going to be a part of this. We got back in the truck and waited for a passing car. I rationalized that we must have hit the deer or something, but she knew we didn't. We hit something else. We got lucky, and after about only 10 minutes, we see some headlights. It could take hours for another car to pass, but on these back roads, as soon as they get close, we flagged down the driver and told him what happened. He told us that he was heading out for an early morning hunting trip. He wasn't in a rush and offered to try and pull out our truck, and followed us, showing a big dent he had from when he hit a deer a few days earlier, which started a conversation about all our wildlife animal refugees. We told him about the deer and asked him if he knew which kind of animal could do that, and he decided to take a look. We walked him to where it was, but it wasn't in the same place, and it wasn't a whole deer anymore. It had been ripped to shreds. Most of its bones were intact, with strips of flesh still attached. It was a horrifying sight, mangled and bent in odd and unsettling ways. He said, "Holy shit, that's a 12-point buck." We asked if he thought a mountain lion could do that kind of damage in 10 minutes, and he just replied, "Maybe," very unconvincingly, and suggested giving us a ride home and coming back for the truck when it's light out. He gave us his number to help him pull the truck out later that day, but we had our uncles do it. We didn't want to bother him anymore. There was a bunch of black fur stuck to the grill but no blood. Our uncles brushed it off as an overreaction, but they never saw the deer. When I tell people this story, they're convinced it was a skinwalker. I responded to a 911 hang-up at our ranges around 9 PM. They are out in the middle of nowhere, in the woods near an old wildlife refuge, so they are pretty isolated. There are no streetlights out there, and it's a few buildings with lots of open fields for sniper ranges and tons of woods. I pulled up to the gate, unlocked it, and drove in. I parked and walked up to the classroom, where the 911 hang-up phone was located. I should also note that this entire area has significance to the Civil War era and World War II, as it was a military installation. I would also like to note that the number for the 911 hang-up does not exist, but it occasionally trips our dispatch call center for unknown reasons. I've had my fair share of paranormal experiences, mostly when I was stationed in Japan, so I take the patrol shotgun out just to feel better about the entire stupid call in the darkness of the night, whilst responding to a 911 hang-up to a line that no longer exists. I unlock the door to the small wooden building. It's a trailer. As I open the door, the only light illuminating my path is a red exit sign directly above the door. I don't see any light switches, so I take a few steps in to locate them. As I do, there is a doorway directly to my right. By this time I can see in my peripheral vision a human-shaped shadow, with the red exit sign illuminating it. I turn quickly with the shotgun, as my heart starts racing. I can make out the face. I quickly start hitting the wall, and manage to find a light switch, which reveals a training dummy sitting in a chair. I take a breath and step back outside onto the deck and radio in for assistance, as I am no longer prepared to go on this ghost hunt alone. I go back inside and do a quick sweep of the building. It only has 5 small training rooms, and I also checked the room where the phone line does not exist. There's no phone. Shocker. I then walk back outside and wait for my backup officer, who comes within 8 minutes of my call. Once he gets there, he already knows how dumb this is, because this call is creepy whenever we get it. We then proceed to check around the outside of the remaining 3 buildings in the area, and there's nothing. So we start heading back to our vehicles. As we approach our cars, an alarm starts going off on a small metal box attached to a metal unit sticking out of the ground. It flashes a red light affixed to the top of the box. We look at each other in dismay. Really? And start walking towards it. It's located between the training range and the Range Bay office. I radio in the alarm and ask if they can contact facilities, since neither of us knew this thing was even out here, and we had no idea how to shut it off. I then notice that there is a small keyhole on the metal box that is attached under the light. I grab my key ring and try to find a key that I think would fit. As soon as I made contact with the key to the metal, the alarm and flashing lights stopped. I looked at my friend and said, "We need to leave." He agreed, saying that this is getting stupid. I radioed in and told them that the alarm had stopped and we were back in service. This was the one and only time I had responded to a call of that nature, but others also had to do it. There are a few grave sites out there with markers from the 1800s, but nowhere near the range area I was at. It's a pretty historical area, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are a few spirits still roaming around the area. Last summer, I spent a good 2 months studying abroad in Italy, and the last few weeks travelling around Europe. It was my first time out of the States for a 21-year-old female going into my senior year of university. I spent my last weekend in Barcelona, Spain. Since I was only there for a short amount of time, I had elected to not pay for a phone nor phone card or anything like that. It wasn't a problem until now. I had gone out, like all young travellers, to a nightclub called Opium. If you're unfamiliar with Spanish nighttime hours, you start at around 2 AM and you'll go on till about maybe 7. I left at around 6 AM. I had travelled alone and stayed in an all-girls dorm in a very nice hostel, and I went with a big group of various European nationals and ended up alone at the very end. So I left in an officially marked taxi cab at the taxi stand outside of the club at 6 AM. I got in, and the driver is scrawny, definitely not of Spanish descent, but that was normal. He speaks English, so I give him the name of my hostel and just stare out the window. And you know what? 10 minutes later, I watch my hostel zoom by. I point this out, but the driver just ignores me and grins. I tell him that we just passed my hostel. He then says, "I don't speak English." "Sunrise." "What?" I ask. "Watch sunrise," he replies. At this point I was dumbfounded. I should have been on my game and jumped out of the cab or something. But I was a tired, alone, drunk, and phoneless suburban American girl. The fact I could have been a statistic took a few moments to dawn on me. Instead, I just stupidly asked him where he thought he was going, and try and gesture behind us towards the hostel. After about 10 minutes of becoming more and more agitated, he grabs my wrist and drags my hand to his crotch. I could feel his hard member through his pants. That was it. I yanked my hand away and started crying, begging him to stop, to let me out, to turn around. But the doors were locked, and he was speeding. At this point, it was way too fast for me to jump out without seriously hurting myself. He simply grabbed my hand again and tried to pull it towards his crotch. But when I yanked away, crying still, he reached over and grabbed my breast and tried to move his hand down to my crotch. At this point, we were maybe 20 minutes away from my hostel and just about exiting the city. I panicked when I saw all the buildings thinning and started shrieking my head off. I really can't tell you what made him do it. I don't know if it was my banshee screams, my tears, or me shoving him in his seat. I don't know. All I can say is that I think he is a disgusting coward. And something about that situation made him finally turn that cab around. Still hysterical, and still dumb for not bolting out of their car, he pulls up outside my hostel, looks at me, and says, €30. As if nothing happened. I wish I could tell you that I told him to go kill himself, but again, I was off my rocker. I numbly reached into my bag and threw him the crumpled notes and ran into my hostel. Some French girls I bonded with asked me what the hell I was doing, and I told them what happened. Apparently something similar happened to another girl just a few weeks ago. She was assaulted. I wish I had gone to the police, but my memories were so fuzzy of exactly which cab company it was and what he looked like, not to mention that I was about to fly back to the States the next day, that I just didn't bother. I don't think I'm going to go back to Europe again without a large group. So, creepy cab driver in Barcelona, let's not meet again. High school for me was extremely bad. It would have been fine if it were just slight name calling, or just being pushed around every so often, but it was a whole lot worse than that. Here is a little bit of background about my school. I live in an extremely popular tourist area with over 1 million tourists each year, with a local population of less than 10,000. My high school was considered outside the city limits and was considered a country school. The reason for this being that local business owners who didn't even live in the same state had to push back city limits to avoid the city taxes. And because it was considered a county high school, it lacked funding, with way too many students. Even in the last year, people still have to carry around books, not computers, to all their classes, and around 80% of the students came to my school from other schools because they had been kicked out and refused to take them back. A lot of them were convicted felons. This resulted in terrible students with teachers who are not paid enough to care and oftentimes did things that they really were not supposed to do. My sophomore year of high school was the worst. I got beaten up every day, people stole my things, and I was pushed around by everyone. I remember in a particular class, 2 kids pulled out knives and threatened to cut my throat. I told the teacher, who replied, "I'll deal with it in a minute." I ended up having to run for my life and call the police. Other things that happened to me during the year included getting stabbed twice, being shot at once, ran over by a car, and pushed off a 2.5-story balcony, and people trying to beat me to death on 3 different occasions. They're all very serious, and I could go on, but I don't want to drag it out. I hope this gives you some perspective into just how awful this school was, with not a trace of caring about what happened to its pupils. As for the actual story, at the beginning of 11th grade, I met a guy called Aspin. Aspin was also picked on, just like me, along with 3 other kids nicknamed the Star Wars Kids. We were all picked on for no known reason. The 5 of us had sat together at lunchtimes for the past few months, and one day, Aspin says, "Wouldn't it be great if everyone here just died?" To which we all replied, yes, because we felt that a lot of these people deserved it for exactly how they had been treating us. We all began talking hypothetically and jokingly about what we would do to the school. But then Aspin took it further. He said he wanted to do a school shooting. We started off by making a list of people we wanted to keep alive, and then Aspin tells us that his father was an avid gun collector, and he had literally hundreds of guns at his disposal, all with ammunition. This started off as a joke, but escalated very quickly. The plan at first was to pull the fire alarm and wait till everybody went outside and then open fire. But we realised that there would be no way of saving the people on the list. After a long time planning, we discovered that we could quite easily lock all the doors from the outside within about 5 minutes, and this meant that it would keep the police out whilst we did what needed to be done. Setting free the good kids, killing everyone and setting fire to the school. We had everything all set to go, but at the time there had been a lot of school shootings happening, and the school decided to add automatically locking doors to all the doors just in case there was a lockdown. After that, we needed to rethink our plan, which was taking so long the end of the year came before we could do anything. For me, 12th grade was the best half year of high school. It had been because by that time, so many people had realised how badly they'd been treating me. I feel like a lot of people started to grow up or stop being dicks, and lots of people apologised to me and expressed that they actually felt bad for what they did, and quite guilty. As this continued throughout the year, and people apologised for things that they had done, I started to feel better and forgive them. Aspin wanted to continue with the shooting, but me and a few of my friends really didn't want to anymore. So I wrote the principal a note telling him about our plan and telling him that Aspin was the ringleader, and a school shooting was avoided. Aspin got arrested, and me and the 3 other Star Wars kids got 3 weeks in ISS. We would have been expelled, but we were allowed to stay on the condition that we never tell anyone about our plan. I graduated high school, and I'm very glad that things ended the way they did, without violence. Number 1. I worked as a security attendant in an apartment building. It's 24 stories, and is one of the oldest buildings in my city. One night, I'm sitting here when the phone rings about 3 AM. I answer. "Hello, this is D'Artagnan at the front desk. How can I help you?" The voice on the other end sounds female, but was totally garbled, and the only bit that I could make out was 23rd floor. I tried to tell the person that I couldn't understand them, and asked which apartment they were in, but again, they garbled a response saying 23rd floor. I said, "Since I can't understand you, I'll come and meet you in the hallway." So I go to the main elevators, and both of them, surprise surprise, are on the 23rd floor. Luckily for me, we have an old service elevator, and it's only on the 7th floor. I get in, and I hit the button for the 23rd floor, but it won't move, and the inner door will not close. So I go to unlock the reset panel, and boom, we start going up, with the door still open. I'm freaking out, and the elevator is shaking because it goes pretty fast and it's quite old. As I'm going up, I just stay towards the back, and finally, I reach floor 23. I step out, door closes just fine, and I look around the hallway. There's no one here. I walk along slowly, trying to listen for anyone who might be awake that's called, but there's nothing. So now I head in the opposite direction and go towards where the regular elevators are. And when I get to them, they're just sitting there with their doors open. I was pretty freaked out, but I knew the elevators could just be on the fritz, so I get in and figure I'll just reset them when I get to the first floor. That's when I hear the sound of the back stairwell closing. So I quickly get out and go to the stairwell, but lo and behold, there's no one there. But the maintenance door to the machine room is ajar. And at that time, I was the only one in the building with a key. See, at the top of the building is a large machine room for housing all the really loud machinery that does stuff in the building and allows access to the roof. I don't really like going in there because it's creepy as hell, and no one ever goes in there. So at this point I'm pretty seriously freaked, but I muster up the courage and head in. I shout hello, and there's no response. The lights in the room flicker because they're crappy fluorescent lights, so I can't see that well either. But at the end of the room, I can make out the roof access door, and sure as shit, it's slightly open. So I slowly continue forwards, checking the space between each machine as I walk by, and there's no one there. So I open the door to the access roof, and I can't see anyone ahead of me on the roof, but there is a slight wraparound, and if there was a jumper or something I needed to be sure. So I stepped out and leave the door ajar like it was. Almost immediately though, the door is pulled shut. Now I might have written it off as the wind or something, but this door is hard to shut, really hard. I immediately grab the handle and yank it open, slam it behind me and run straight for the maintenance door. It automatically locks when it's closed, so I slam it shut too and go back down to the 23rd floor hallway. I get into an elevator and the door is still open, and I go all the way down to the first floor. I go back to the main lobby, and as soon as I sit down, the phone rings. I pick it up and don't say a word, and sure as hell, garbled voice again audibly says, 23rd floor. I hung up the phone, turned the ringer off, and spent the rest of the evening just staring at the parking garage security monitor. Dan works as a beach patrol officer for a small town on the east coast of Florida. Compared to most other law enforcement jobs, beach patrol is fairly mundane. To give you an idea, the highlight of your average work week during peak season is usually something like treating a swimmer with a jellyfish sting, breaking up a fight, or arresting some drunk idiot for disorderly intoxication. Of course, every now and then, you do see a little more action, and occasionally, you see something truly horrific. There was a teenager in a town about 10 miles north of where my friend works, who went missing one night whilst partying on the beach with some friends. The 17-year-old high school senior was a star athlete on the football team and a strong swimmer by all accounts, so none of his friends were overly concerned when he waded into the choppy surf by himself. They sat around their bonfire, drinking beer and having a good time. They said they only took their eyes off him for a minute, and the next thing they knew, he was gone. Now, the first thing that probably comes to your mind of those listening is that this kid must have been taken down by a shark. Truth be told, shark attacks are far less common than you might think, and when they do happen, they're seldom fatal. The biggest threat to swimmers is actually rip currents. These powerful underwater currents can happen out of nowhere and are very quick, sweep even the strongest swimmer out to sea. Growing up in Florida, we're taught from an early age that if you're caught in one, you can escape by swimming parallel to the shore. The trouble is, a lot of people end up panicking and trying to swim against the current, exhausting themselves to the point that they eventually drown. It's easy to imagine how rationality can be abandoned for panic in such a scenario, especially for someone swimming alone at night who has been drinking. Either way, the authorities were notified of the disappearance. The police conducted a search of the area by helicopter, but turned up nothing. A missing persons report was filed, and everyone waited with bated breath as they feared for the worst. A few days later, Dan was at the beach patrol station when a Code 7, which is the dispatch code for a dead person, was called over the radio. He was one of the first responders to the scene when a couple of young teens claimed to have found a body drifting in the water. Through his binoculars, he could see what appeared to be a human head bobbing up and down at the waves, so he and two other officers went out in the patrol boat to investigate. As they got closer, they could see that it was in fact a dead body. The head was, for the most part, still intact, with the hot summer sun relentlessly beating down on it for the last 3 days. It was beginning to show signs of advanced decomposition. The eyes and lips looked to have been pecked away by seagulls, but the features were still mostly discernible, and it was definitely the missing high school student. From the neck down, however, was a completely different story. The rest of the body, which had been in the water the entire time, was now little more than a skeleton, with white flesh rags clinging to the bones. That had been, of course, been nibbled by all manner of aquatic life. Given the condition of the body, the only way to get it back to shore was to lasso it around the neck with a rope and tow it behind the boat. The most ghoulish thing about it, according to Dan, wasn't watching the fish following the body and biting at the stringy strands of rotting tissue as they pulled it with the boat, as was dragging it onto shore, only to discover that the ribcage and pelvis were infested with crabs, which had been enjoying a feast of their own. As for the two teens who reported it, they had been out surfing when one of them felt something brush up against him. He thought it was just a clump of seaweed, until he turned around and realized he was staring straight into the eyeless sockets of a human corpse. The incident was so traumatic that the boy apparently needed psychiatric counseling. I grew up in a Hindu cult. It was the truth, exemplified in our guru with his lifestyle of 6 cars, 2 mansions, 3 businesses, and international vacations in first class, together with annual celebrations of his family members' birthdays, all of which we were solicited to pay for and sponsored to the bottom of our pockets. We had to be in debt up to our eyeballs in order to prove our devotion. We were the elite, destined for self-realization, and were only allowed to have limited association with the rest of the world, even with our own non-believer families. Disobedience meant shunning and expulsion. We celebrated our birthdays only by decorating the guru's home, and giving gifts to him and his family. I was homeschooled and attended university by long-distance learning, all so that I could stay in the group, with our strict timetables of daily morning and evening prayers, communal meals, and morning and evening sermons by the guru. We had mandatory purification baths every morning and evening, and if we were to touch something polluted, like an unbathed person, old food, a menstruating woman, or dirty clothes, or even a thread from a cloth, we had to bathe and change clothes all over again. Some of the rules like that were really weird. We asked the guru's permission for every step in our lives. About our education, our career, our marriage. Vaccines were frowned upon, and if you got chickenpox or cancer or had an accident, it's because you had bad karma or ego. Girls had to wear their hair long, and both sexes had to wear old-fashioned traditional clothes that covered us from shoulder to ankle. We had to be vegetarian, and it was easy to control people, as we lived in rental accommodation owned by the guru's organization. Overseas disciples had visas sponsored by him, and he handled our utilities, phones, and internet. These were occasionally cut off or destroyed, once or twice by bulldozers, to discipline some disciples. In addition to the public shaming during the sermons and being yelled at, we also got physical correction, or purification as he called it. It was considered a blessing to be hit by him, as it was his guidance and his touch was sacred. Teens were strictly supervised. We got in trouble after a group of teens went out, chaperoned mind you, to a local temple's dance and music program, and more seriously when we went to the beach, since the cult provided everything we needed in life. Romance was of course forbidden, and marriages arranged by the guru between group members. The more the couple was opposed to each other, the more ideal it would be, as it put the guru first always in your marriage. Even those young people who vomited in disgust or swore they'd rather die were gently coerced into marriages, gays too, with the opposite sex. Several disciples were encouraged to and did break off their engagements or divorce their significant other, believing that it would be blocking the light and drive them insane. 2 girls eloped, and no one, including their families, attended the wedding. We were all told that natural disasters and man-made tragedies were due to our impurities. To offset these, we made huge donation to the guru's temple. He even had a badly hidden camera to film worshippers who thought they were alone. We were told that in fact nothing would be immoral if the guru, the living truth, asked it, whether financial, transactions, plagiarism, lying, nor stealing. Information was strictly controlled. Gradually movies were banned and our libraries disbanded. People were told to stop talking to one another. New babies were secluded at home. Disobedient disciples were sent out of town and shunned for several days as punishment. Around the point that we were told to cut off our mobile phones and give up our Wi-Fi and data and abandoned our pets, I read up on cults on the internet and decided to get out. I sold my jewelry to finance my plane ticket, driving lessons, and returned to university classes and a cult recovery workshop. In my recovery group, I discovered how similar our cults were. My friends and family in the cult have cut me off. My other family and ex-cult members have welcomed me back with open arms. I worked maintenance at a hotel in Montana about a decade ago. It was mostly normal shit. Guests were rarely an issue. The job was meh, but I was a broke student at the time in college. Weird shit happened to me when I got stuck with the late shift from 7 p.m. till about 2 a.m. Honest to God, I still can't explain it. I was downstairs in the basement setting up the big meeting room for some big event tomorrow. I have to explain the layout of this meeting room for people to understand. It was this huge room with 3 doors. The main door that opened into the hallway, the fire exit which locked from the inside, and the kitchen entrance. The kitchen had 2 entrances also, one into the meeting room and the other opening into the hallway. Anyway, that night I had spent all of the first part of my shift setting out this room by myself. 15 big tables, tablecloths, centerpieces, and God knows how many of those metal stackable chairs. It was about 5 hours of doing that, and I was actually pretty proud of my setup and vacuuming the hallway outside of the meeting room. I watched as the kitchen crew closed up for the night and waved them off. Lights out, and it's just me and my vacuum in front of this big-ass meeting room. I was finishing up my vacuuming when I hear the unmistakable sound of those metal chairs being stacked. Anyone who has ever stacked or unstacked those chairs knows that weird hollow metal clang. Especially me, after doing it for a few hours. I was a bit pissed. I had just spent 5 hours setting up this meeting room and figured that 1 or 2 of the kitchen staff went into the lounge before they clocked off. Mind you, I'm in front of the main door to the meeting room and the hall door for the kitchen. The only way in or out of this meeting room was past me, aside from the fire door, which you can't get in from the inside. Anyway, I hear the clanking, and I go running into the room with a, "Hey guys, knock it off," expecting to see a cook or 2, rearranging my precision chair setup. Instead, I am greeted with no one. The room is exactly as I'd left it. No chairs were moved. No one was in. I double-checked the kitchen, and no one was in there either. I shrugged it off as a trick of my ears and went back to vacuuming. As I finish vacuuming and turn it off, I hear the clanking again. Unmistakable, clear as day, coming from the big room. Again, I stomp into the room and proceed to do a thorough sweep, checking under tables, behind the podium, even in the storage closet in the back. There was no one. I'm getting a bit freaked out, so I just stand in the middle of the room, straining my ears to hear anything, thinking that maybe the noise is coming from the vents outside or something. But there's nothing, just me breathing. I shrug and head back out to pick up the vacuum. Winding the cord, I just happen back towards the main door of the meeting room. Before my head turns fully towards the door, I see someone walking right past the opening inside the room. I freak the hell out. I yelped and ran up the stairs to the main floor. I told management I was clocking out early and went home. Next day, I went in and got a minor scolding for not putting the vacuum away. I didn't believe in ghosts, and I have no explanation for what I saw. I heard the noises clearly, and I saw someone go past the doorway. I asked to be transferred to the day shift after that. Later that year, I quit the job to go back to school. One of my co-workers mentioned that one of the cleaning ladies was telling everyone that the basement was haunted. I don't know. It still gives me goosebumps whenever I think about that night. This happened to me when I was 6 or 7 years old. I remember this very clearly to this day, and it still makes my spine shiver thinking about it. I had the large bedroom in my flat. My mum had decorated the walls with pink and lavender paint and cute little metallic swirls I had bunk beds, glittery curtains in my window, charms, and glittery things hanging from the ceiling. A young girl's dream. I'll try to explain a rough layout of my room. The door opens, and you will immediately see my purple bunk beds, with my head facing out the door. On the wall in front of you, behind my bunk beds, is a long window. To the left on the wall looking out to my garden. The next wall to my left of the bunk beds has a large fireplace, which I used to put all my trinkets on, and then the joining wall to my door was more of an alcove. Anyway, that is where I saw her. I remember getting into bed at night, and everything seemed normal at first. My room wasn't usually too dark, because the moonlight shone through my window and through my glittery curtains. After trying to sleep for what seemed like ages, I don't know why, but I started to look around my room, particularly in the alcove area. Something was in the dark corner. I couldn't focus my eyes properly for a while, but when I did, I noticed my girl's world head, one of those plastic weird lady heads that you can do makeup on and style her hair, stood out in the moonlight against the creepy dark corner. I remember going to lay back down on my bed, but I had an urge to look back, and when I did I was paralyzed with fear. At first I thought I might be imagining it, because I had been staring at the plastic lady head, but I swear I saw this dark woman-like outline stood right there next to the plastic head. It was like a dark grey black mist, but in the shape of a woman. I slowly looked at her, or it, with its massive bulging eyes, scanning down and saw that she had no feet. There was nothing there. No shadow, no feet, nothing. She or it was levitating about 10 inches off the ground, and it seemed like she was moving towards me. I was absolutely terrified, and will always remember this because of how cripplingly scary it was. I was in shock. I quickly spun around in bed and curled into the fetal position, with my quilt tightly wrapped around me. I made sure the quilt was tightly wrapped around my neck and head. And can I just add that there were no labels or anything that could have emulated what happened next. I was shaking and trying not to breathe loudly when I felt something standing behind me, leaning over me. I closed my eyes and gripped the quilt, and all of a sudden, I felt a tickle on the back of my neck. It's the feeling you get when someone puts their fingers on the back of your neck. It started off like that, and then became quickly more aggressive, tightening around the back of my neck, as if someone were trying to keep hold of me. I tried to scream, but no words came out. I was sweating and shaking, and my neck was getting worse. It was hurting. I tried screaming over and over, but all that came out were the little squeaks. It was as if I were gasping for air. I remember the moment when I was finally able to scream for my mum. I screamed at the top of my lungs, but it came out as a cracked, blood-curdling cry for help. But as soon as she ran in and flung the door open, a burst of light came through and the whole thing stopped. My mum grabbed me out of bed and carried me to the front room, cradling me as I sobbed hysterically. To this day, she still believes me in what I said, even though she's never had a personal paranormal experience. There was no way I lied about what I saw. From then on, I slept with my mum for a while, and we eventually moved out. I'm grateful that we haven't been back since.